everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm your host Emily and this is the Astral Library. Now you might be noticing a bit of a different background, so we're actually in my bedroom and I thought it'd be very appropriate that I do this in front of my little fandom corner here because today I'm going to be talking to you about 10 fan fictions that mean the most to me and that I might even say are better than most traditionally published works. So if you don't know what fan fiction is, let me enlighten you. Let me bring you down the dark path that is fan fiction because, oh my god, it's amazing. Especially if you are a romance lover, you should definitely be reading fan fiction. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about what fan fiction is. So fan fiction goes by many different names and has many different subgenres. Typically, when we mean fan fiction, we mean transformative fiction or fiction that is born from your more standard canonized pieces like literature or TV shows or video games, whatever. It is created by fans of a certain form of media who then take that and transform it into their own, whether it be something like a self-insert where they insert themselves or their own characters, whether it be slash fan fiction where they're looking at romance between either on-screen couples or even couples that aren't together in the show or movie or whatever. And then there's fan fiction that is just putting the characters into different scenarios and seeing how they react and how they maybe address certain topics in a more modern view if it's a historical work, or a historical work if it's a more modern. There's a ton of different ways you can transform a piece of fiction into new lenses and make it seem like its own work. Now, fan fiction often gets a lot of bad reputation. It's treated often in the same ways that romance is treated as a genre, where it's seen as not serious pieces of literature and writing. It's frivolous, it's just filled with smut, it's weird, and more oftentimes it's bad writing. Well, I wanted to dispel that because fan fiction is some of my favorite type of reading to do. Not only because it just evolves works that I already love, but because the writing itself is so beautiful and so diverse in a way that traditional publishing just isn't doing and sometimes refuses to do. The thing you have to remember about fan fiction is that the authors who write it are doing it in their own free time and completely for free. It is actually illegal to make money off of fan fiction and has run into quite a few lawsuits because of that. People who are devoting time and effort into putting out these fan fictions, some of which are longer than the piece of media that they come from, I'm talking thousands upon thousands of words, are done completely and released completely for free for other fans to enjoy. It's in its name, fan fiction. It is fiction made by fans for other fans. And it's so beautiful. So I want to talk to you a little bit about my fan fiction journey and how I started getting into this, because it wasn't something I just fell into necessarily, and I didn't always have the most positive view of it like most people, because I just didn't know what fan fiction was. So my journey actually started when I was about, I want to say either 6th grade or in middle school, which is often how usually you fall into fanfiction pretty early, or you encounter it pretty early. Now, mind you, I was probably too young to be reading the fanfiction I was reading, which mainly accounted to weird little fanfictions posted on fanfiction.net that were either lemons or smutty, or were really focused on self-insert and OCs. Now, there's nothing wrong with this type of fanfiction. It's often where a lot of people start and a lot of people can really get into, because we love to see ourselves reflected in fiction, especially when we get to create our own characters, interact with characters we love and adore, and in a world and story that we also hold really dear to our heart. And I was no exception. I love to create like fictional characters and talk with my friends about what would our characters do, who would we get with on these animes we love. And so the fanfiction I was reading was mainly circling around that. And I wouldn't necessarily say I was reading. I encountered maybe 1 or 2 fics here and there that was like, okay, this is okay. It wasn't the best writing. It was a self-insert OC character. It was whatever. I didn't think too much about it. Where I kind of found my enjoyment was creating my own character and talking about it with my friends at the time. And like, I always had loved story writing, and so getting to just do that and engage in that kind of conversation was really fun and really made me feel part of a community. Now, I will never ever release the deep dark secrets of what I had written at that time, because oh my god, it is so bad. It is so bad. Never. I still have them. They're still on my computer. They're still posted on fanfiction.com, and I will never let them see the light of day again because they were written by a middle school girl. So they're going to stay buried where they are in middle school. And that's actually where I hit a huge pause on my fanfiction journey. I stopped being friends with the people who I would engage in that kind of conversation with. I never really read anyone else's fanfiction other than her own and the couple I had seen here and there. To me, fanfiction was like, oh, this kind of baby thing, this like kid thing you did where you're making your own characters and you're essentially creating a Mary Sue or this all-powerful character who could do anything, and she's not like other girls. Because that's what I did for my fanfiction. That's what I thought all of fanfiction was. But I was so wrong. And I wasn't aware of how wrong I was until high school. By this time, I had gotten into fandom via Tumblr. I was obsessed with all the huge Tumblr shows, so like Supernatural, Doctor Who, and Sherlock Holmes. And I just could not get enough of all the media and videos and drawings. And eventually, of course, because it's Tumblr, fanfiction started kind of like coming across my feed. But even then I had this like bad taste in my head, like, oh, fanfiction is terrible. It's what kids do. It is not serious. It's bad writing. It's all just kind of like weird sex stuff. And so I never thought twice about it. But one fanfiction kept popping up over and over and over again. And finally, I was sick of hearing about it. Sick of hearing how everyone said it's so sad. It made them cry. I was like, what is this? And so I finally read Twist and Shout by Gabriel and Standbyme. And that is when my world changed. How do I describe Twist and Shout? It's one of those fics that everyone's kind of heard about, especially if you are in the fanfiction world. It's just one of the most liked and talked about and referenced fics that a lot of people actually refer to when they say how they got into fanfiction or the fanfiction that broke their heart. And Twist and Shout is everything it kind of makes itself out to be. It is not a long fic. It's maybe 90 or so thousand words, it is not the longest fic out there, which I think equates to about 400 or so pages, maybe 500. So it's a pretty standard, like typical like fantasy noveling, and it broke me. I remember staying up so late in the night reading this fan fiction and bawling my eyes out. And I had never cried in a piece of media like I had Twist and Shout, because it was just so beautiful and it made me feel so deeply and so like viciously that I was like sobbing, like having to hold my hand over my mouth so my parents wouldn't hear me sobbing in my bedroom over this fictional story with this fictional couple that I loved from Supernatural. It is the first official fan fiction that I read that made me cry and made me realize just what a powerhouse this form of media and writing could be. I still think about Twist and Shout to this day. Not only because it was the first fan fiction I say is the first fan fiction I read, but because of how beautiful it was and how much it still kind of breaks my heart when I think about it. I equate it to The Pursuit of Happiness. If you've ever seen that movie, you watch that movie exactly one time because it's so fucking sad and it breaks your heart every time that you never want to watch it again. That's my Twist and Shout. I've only read that fic once, years ago, damn near 10 years ago, and I still think about it and I'm still afraid to go back and read it because I know it's gonna break my heart. Because yes, it is sad, but it's almost worth the sadness. And as much as I was sobbing and crying, I still think about it. Every time I hear Twist and Shout by the Beatles, it still makes my heart ache. Every time I hear Can't Help Falling in Love with You by Elvis, I want to cry, because that's how powerful fanfiction can be. It lingers and it like holds a special place in your heart, just like any other traditionally published book can do. When you think of your favorite book, think of how often you think of it and how things just remind you of it. That is what Twist and Shout did. It had nothing to do with the original content of the show, which was Supernatural. It just had the characters. It was set during the Vietnam War. It was way removed from everything that the show was about, but it still lingers more than the show itself at times. And that is the moment my world spiraled, because after I read Twist and Shout, I became obsessed with this new form of media and this new way to engage with the fandoms that I already loved and I was already involved in. I started reading more Supernatural fanfiction. I started reading Doctor Who fanfiction, Sherlock Holmes fanfiction. Anything I can get my hands on, I started reading fanfiction of. But I didn't find anything like Twist and Shout for a while. And so the second fanfiction I want to share with you that really changed my way of thinking is Away Childish Things by Leonard. Now, this is kind of a funny story because it is a Harry Potter fanfiction. Specifically, it is Harry and Draco fanfiction. And the one thing you have to know about me is, first, fuck J.K. Rowling. But two, I didn't care about Harry Potter as a kid. I never read the books. I've only seen the first 6 movies. Still haven't seen the last 2. Probably never will. And I always kind of grew up saying I didn't like Harry Potter. I thought the world was really interesting, but the books and the characters themselves, I didn't care about. So how the hell did I end up with Harry Potter fanfiction on this list? Well, I was on Tumblr, as one does, and I don't remember who posted it. I don't remember what happened, but I came across Harry Draco fan art, and it was really pretty. I was like, oh, that's super cool. I knew people shipped Harry and Draco together. I knew that the fandom existed, but again, I was outside of it. Well, I kept seeing this fan art over and over again. I was like, okay, you know what? Let me go ahead and just take a look. I mean, I read fan fiction all the time. I'm in between fandoms right now. So let me go ahead and see what this is all about. Why is everyone so obsessed with this couple? And so I go on Archive of Our Own. I go to Harry Draco and I sort the list by kudos, which is kind of like people who like the fic. And I was scrolling through and like a few popped up here and there that sounded really interesting. And I ended up stumbling upon Away Childish Things. It's a story about how Harry gets de-aged by a potion accident and Draco's having to take care of him, which they're like, oh, that could be really funny and silly. And so I clicked on it. It changed everything because I fell in love with the fandom and characters I had zero interest in and really had zero idea of what actually happens in the story other than the vague recollections I had of the movies, which I hadn't watched for years prior to this. I started reading and I'm watching Draco having to take care of Harry as a small child who had not gone to Hogwarts yet and was still being abused by the Dursleys in his home, and Draco coming to that realization and having to treat Harry the way he should have been treated from the beginning. And I fell in love so quickly, not only with Leonard's writing, but with the betrayal of Harry and Draco and just how beautiful the relationship ended up being, not only with Draco taking care of Harry as a child, but then when the reverse happens and Harry must take care of Draco then as a child, and both of them just learning about who they were as people before they encountered each other at Hogwarts, what it meant to really learn about them without the kind of drama and presence of Voldemort and Death Eaters and all the kind of like antagonism that happened between them during the school. Leonard did such a good job of not only depicting abuse and the effect it can have on children, but also the way that self-hatred can really damage yourself and separate you from everyone. Away Childish Things is the first fanfiction I ever read outside of any fandom I had engaged with. And it taught me that you didn't necessarily have to be in the fandom or not even care about that form of media to understand how powerful and how much fanfiction can transcend the media itself and really stand on its own as its own piece of literature. And it's powerful and impactful. And Away Childish Things showed me just how powerful it could be, because it could take something that you could have negative feelings about and still enjoy it, and it means a lot. Away Childish Things is one of my favorite fics of all time, and I've read thousands upon thousands of fanfiction at this point, and I still think about it and I still go back and reread it over and over again. The next fanfiction I would like to recommend and talk about is Prince Among Wolves by Wrenegade. Now, this is a Styles and Derek fanfiction from the fandom Teen Wolf, which I was obsessed with in high school. It seemed like a silly little story because the premise is that Derek has these 2 kids and he's looking for a babysitter, and Styles applies to be the babysitter. I didn't think it would be. I just thought it might be a fun time. And what I ended up getting was the first piece of work that I ever read that had trans representation in it, particularly within one of Derek's children, and watching as Styles not only got to learn about what it meant to be transgendered and kind of the feelings that went with it, but also the stigma that these kids and these people face with people telling them who they are. And even Derek, who didn't quite understand what his own child was saying and having to learn and work through that. Now, I can't necessarily say whether or not this is a 100% great representation of what it means to be trans and kind of the trans experience. I can attest to that. I am not trans and it's not my space or place to say this is good rep, this is bad rep. But I will say that prior to this, I had never really encountered or engaged with any sort of work that presented a trans character. Or I understood like the concept behind being transgender and was aware of kind of like the complications and the stigma that was being faced, but I didn't quite understand it. It was a topic that was like beyond my comprehension at the time. And I didn't really know how to engage in media with it. And so when I came across this fic, I at first was a little hesitant because I didn't know, again, if this was good or bad representation. I didn't know anything, but I was invested in the story, so I decided to finish it out. And I'm so glad I did, because watching Styles and Derek engage with this kid who is advocating for who they are and fighting to represent themselves in that way really opened my eyes to what it meant to be transgender, and like what it meant to like face that struggle. And even though I couldn't understand it and it was something beyond my comprehension as a cisgendered woman, it made me want to look more into it and to educate myself more into that space and what it meant and what people were saying, because it just made it easier for me to understand, which it put my foot in the door, and in a way that I don't think I would have encountered or would have done till much, much later in my life than I had when I read this fic. And I'm so thankful for it, because that's the beauty of fan fiction. Not only can you make a character whatever you want. If you want to make a character black, go ahead and make them black. If you want to make them transgendered, make them transgendered. Fan fiction is a space for fans, and where traditional publishing lacks that diversity, fan fiction is filled with it. Now, I will say that not all the representation is good, and you do have to make sure you're being careful when you're filtering and looking through fan fiction, but it is some of the most diverse form of writing out there, because it is usually written by queer and POC people, because that is who is engaging with the media and wants to transform it to see more of themselves. It is a beautiful form of diversity. And so I'm super thankful, Prince Among Wolves by Wrenegade, for writing that work and opening my eyes to a experience and concept that I was otherwise struggling with. And I don't think I would have understood or been as open to it now if I hadn't already been given this little nudge to expand my own horizons and my understanding. The next fic I actually want to talk to you about is a combination of two fics. It is Until My Feet Bleed and My Heart Aches, as well as Of Bright Stars and Burning Heart by Reiya. Now, this is a duo of fan fictions that are the same story told from two different characters, particularly the two characters in the main pairing. So these are both Yuri on Ice fan fiction, where it is depicting Yuri and Victor falling in love through competition, like years of competition. It is a canon divergence, which means it takes a canon event of the story, what happened originally in the anime, and it diverges from that path at some point. Now, this can mean like, oh, they're changing a simple thing, like instead of decision A, they're doing decision B, or they won this competition, they lose this competition, whatever happened. But in this case, we are taking the very first encounter that happens between Victor and Yuri in the show and twisting it where Yuri is kind of snubbed by Victor. And that changes his entire worldview. And he essentially dedicates his life to getting revenge on Victor and to steal gold from him. And we're in these fics, we're watching that journey where Yuri's pushing himself further and faster to achieve gold and to win, to spite Victor. And along the way, we see them falling in love. These two fics are told the first one's from Yuri's point of view. So we're seeing everything that happens through his lens and what he's thinking and how he is interpreting these interactions. And the second one follows Victor and what he thought of their interactions and how he fell in love with Yuri, which was a lot sooner than Yuri does with him. And Reiya did just such an amazing job of having a story told not only once, but twice, and making both times unique and interesting and entertaining. Because that's one complaint I have about books that are essentially the same story from a different perspective. Usually you get bored. I wasn't bored a single time in either of these fics. And in fact, I wanted to go back and reread the first one so I could look at them side by side, because it's just how powerful point of view works to play in a story. The character which we're following and the narrator that we're using colors so much of the story. And if you change that narrator and that point of view, everything else changes too. And Reiya does that masterfully. She takes a love story where we're hating Victor the entire time alongside Yuri. But then to get Victor's point of view and to see what he is thinking and how he's interpreting his interactions, you realize that a lot of your own feelings are tied to what the character is feeling and how they're coloring the world with their opinions and thoughts and interpretations. These two fics just work so well in tandem with each other, not only as their own standalone stories. You could read one of them and be completely fine, but you're missing so much of the story if you don't read the other perspective. So the next fic I want to talk about is Divided We Stand by KouriArashi. Now, this is again another Styles and Derek fanfiction from Teen Wolf. But whereas the last one was the kind of like way to open my eyes to what it meant to be transgendered, this fic is just, it's so different because it is kind of like a mates fic where like soulmates, so they are like destined to be together and they're like drawn together. This fic, we have Derek, who's older than Styles as he is in the show, and he chooses Styles in what's known as the searching ceremony, or where the ceremony where people kind of gather along in wolves, come to meet these groups of people, and they are like drawn to their scents or something. And Styles, who wasn't meant to be there, who's only popping in to get his friend, encounters Derek, and Derek just points us as him. And Styles is kind of swept away into what does it mean to be a werewolf's mate? What does it mean to be picked by Derek and his family, who are seen as like celebrity and powerful group in their hometown. It's a romance story that deals a lot with struggle in acceptance and just pressure of society, because there's something sinister going on with these ceremonies where they've been kind of warped from their original meaning, which is just to bring people together and allow them to talk to each other. And now it's become a competition of who can attract the eyes of the werewolf, who are going to pamper you and essentially treat you like a princess and be like your sugar daddy, sugar mama, whatever. And so we have these kind of like dual perspectives kind of butting heads with each other, and it's just such a great story. And it's a fic I actually go back to and reread almost every year. Again, it is the fic I always return to more than a lot of these on the list. I almost religiously reread at least this first installment, Divided We Stand, over and over again every year. It is a fic that taught me kindness and resilience even in the face of those that scare us and in seemingly impossible tasks, that you can persevere and come together and bridge these divisions among people and become stronger because of it. And I think that's reflected in the title that KouriArashi chose, Divided We Stand, and as the later, like Together We Rebuild and Together We Stand. All of those really kind of like are the message behind this fic, and I think they do an amazing job. The next fic I actually have for you is, I need to actually read the title because I always mess it up. So Black As Is the Raven, He'll Get a Parter by Nekojita. Now, I love Neko. Neko's my girl. I adore everything she's written. Everything she's written. And really anything from this author could take this place on this list. But this is a fic that I remember adoring because I was reading it as it came out. And the one thing you gotta know about Nekojita fics is that they're fucking long. Like, I'm talking, this fic is over 600,000 words. Harry Potter and the Order of Phoenix, which is like the chunkiest book in the Harry Potter series, I think it's 200,000 words. So let that sink in. So 200,000 words is about the length of Order of the Phoenix. This is over 600,000 words, written for free, released for free. And oh my God. The level of her writing is so detailed and so fun and so beautiful that blows my mind. She could write a book now and publish it, and I'd be the first in line to buy it. I'm getting ahead of myself. What is this fic? So this fic is actually part of the All for the Game fandom, which is a self-published series by Nora Sakovic. Now, the books themselves are fucking balls to the wall crazy, and I don't have time to get into how kind of bizarre they sound. I promise you they're fun. In fact, the Book Leo has a really good video she just put out about All for the Game, so I'll link that also down below because that's a great kind of like, what is this series? For this particular fanfiction, instead of ending up with the foxes like Neil does in the show, he is kidnapped by the ravens and forced to join their team and is essentially tortured under Rico, who is the captain of the Ravens, rule. And he's kind of like brought into not only the kind of nefarious things going on in the team, but becomes involved in the Yakuza portion that owns the Ravens, is so deeply entrenched in the plot of the book. And I don't necessarily want to spoil the book for you guys, but it goes through the events of the books, but instead of Neil being on the team, he is now the enemy, and he is super antagonistic to what were his friends in the alternate universe. Like I said, every fic she writes, and she writes a lot in the All for the Game fandom, every fic of hers is super dark. So that's one thing I really like about her writing, is that it's not afraid to get dark and to really take a look at these horrific things that can happen to a person. And it really taught me, just even at your lowest point, even when everything felt like it'll never get better, that there's still a way out and that you could still crawl from that pit if you have to. That what happened to you and what is chaining you down doesn't have to define you for the rest of your life, that there will be a better day, even when it doesn't feel like it, that there will be a light at the end of that fucked up shitty tunnel that you're stuck in. And Black as a Raven really encapsulates that. The next fic I want to talk about is Soup-pocalypse and the Great Curry Cataclysm by SquadOfCats, where Black as a Raven is a very dark fic. This is a very wonderfully funny and fluffy fic. So if you're not in the mood for something angsty and dark, I highly recommend this fic, especially by SquadOfCats, because not only is their writing beautiful, but I found myself laughing out loud reading this fic over and over again. So this is another Harry and Draco fan fiction. And so this whole fic is about Draco and cooking all these meals and like trying to woo Harry through food. And while that sounds like a very silly and unserious premise, it's actually a really beautiful fic that deals with a lot of like internal issues like PTSD, self-hatred, anxiety, and depression. But the reason that this fic is on this list is not because of any of those things, but because it is the first fic that I ever read that had demisexuality representation in it. And that was so important to me as a demisexual person myself. It is the first time I ever felt really seen and represented in a form of media. I saw myself represented not only in Draco, who was demisexual, but also in how Harry loved and how he was dealing with PTSD and depression and closing himself off, holding him back from the love, a beautiful relationship and love that he desired so much. And Soup-pocalypse and the Great Curry Cataclysm was just beautiful. The next fic I have is Lessons in Cartography by Profenity. Now, this is another All for the Game fanfiction, but whereas other fanfictions on this list are alternative universes or canon divergence, this fic truly shows the kind of capability of fanfiction. So Lessons in Cartography is a continuation of the All for the Game series. It continues past the events of the end of the third book and just looks at the characters. It incorporates the author's kind of like extra notes that where she was talking about what goes on post-series with the characters, and Profenity took those notes and created a full-blown story. This is the fic that really showed me that fanfiction is the perfect cure for a book hangover, a good book hangover, like that you read a book and then you just fall in love with and you don't want to let the characters go. Maybe it ends too abruptly. Maybe you still have so many questions left. Fanfiction is the place to go. If you're ever having a book hangover and you're like loving characters so much, whether it be, again, a book, a TV show, whatever, any sort of media hangover, go to fanfiction. Lessons in Cartography, I felt really captured that feeling and really made me feel like the book wasn't over yet. This fic showed me that if I ever feel that I can go to fanfiction and discover fics that will kind of close that wound. The next fanfiction I have is a bit of an older one. In fact, this fic was actually deleted and then reposted by the author, and I'm so thankful they did, because it is Once Around the Sun by 11T7. 11T7 is famous in a couple fandoms. They wrote a really popular and fantastic Draco Harry fanfiction, but Once Around the Sun is actually a Zuko and Katara fanfiction from Avatar: The Last Airbender. It is another fic that is a continuation of canon where Zuko and Katara go looking for Zuko's mother. I just remember reading 11D7's writing and realizing how beautiful writing can be. Not just fanfiction, but writing in itself can be, because 11D7 just has such a way with words and of crafting the characters and the world and the story that draws you in. And it's not quite purple prose, it's art in itself and how 11D7 crafts these words. And it showed me that writing can be so beautiful and devastating in a way that will stay with you forever, that will imprint itself on your heart. It's what you would get tattooed upon yourself, or what I would get tattooed upon myself over and over again. Once Around the Sun is a very slow moving story that really focuses on character development and learning to forgive yourself and to forgive others for the mistakes they made in your past and how your past even shaped you. It's about learning how to forgive yourself and how to move on with your life, even if you don't ever get the answers you need or want. All right, so technically my list ends at Once Around the Sun, but I wanted to add one more fic to this that I wouldn't necessarily say is better than traditionally published things, but it is also a fanfiction that holds a high place in my heart, and it is actually a fanfiction that I wrote myself. It is called Something, Nothing, and Everything, and it is a fanfiction I wrote for the All for the Game fandom. This is not the first fanfiction I wrote. Hell, it's not even the 10th fanfiction I wrote, but it is the fanfic that I am most proud of, because it showed me that I could write a full-length novel that I am almost 100% satisfied with it, despite all the flaws and the things I still wish I could change. I am still so proud and satisfied with what I created in that fic. It came at a quite tumultuous time in my life because I had just gotten into my master's program, so I had to move across the country. And I remember writing this story and editing it on the drive to Ohio, which took about 3 days, and it was a bizarre time. I had to do so much editing and writing. I had to physically print it out so I could do all the edits. And even now, I still love the story I told as much as I sometimes cringe at it. I'm so proud of that fanfic. And even though I'm in the worst writing slump I've ever been in my life, where I haven't touched fanfiction, like writing fanfiction, in over 2 years, I think going on 3 years now, I still think about that fic, and I still think about its sequel that I'm toying with and playing with in the back of my head every day, and I'm like jotting down ideas of like what can happen in the next story. It was so much fun writing it, and it showed me that I could be an accomplished writer even if I'm never traditionally publishing, even though I still want to traditionally publish something and I would love to make my living off of being an author. I could still write and be an author while pursuing other careers, like my doctoral degree in English and becoming a professor, which is something I'm also equally passionate about. And writing this fan fiction really taught me that I didn't have to devote everything in my life to that and still get that satisfaction of being an author. And that story, I just love it so much for teaching me that lesson and for showing me that I was capable of writing a full-length novel that touched people in a lot of ways that I've always dreamed my writing could. I still get comments to this day about how people cried reading my fanfic, or how they loved it so much and how it helped them. That is the best thing I've ever received in life. And every time I get those comments, even now, they just make my day. I've been rambling for over an hour now. So hopefully that's going to be cut down for you guys. You're not going to be stuck here for an hour listening to me go on and on about fan fiction. But that's all I have for you today. If you liked this video, leave a comment down below telling me what are your favorite fan fictions and what fan fictions have you enjoyed. I am always looking for new recommendations, and I will read just about anything now. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel out and lets me know that you're enjoying this type of content, and to keep making more content like this. I really enjoyed this video. Talking about fan fiction is always something I want to do and to talk more about here on BookTube. But I will see you in the next video. Bye!